I can't get beyond the boundaries of Fantasia. What's so funny about that?
Fantasia has no boundaries, foolish boy. Don't you know anything about Fantasia? It's the world of human fantasy. Every part, every creature of it is a piece of the dreams and hopes of mankind. Therefore, it has no boundaries.
But why is Fantasia dying then?
Because people have begun to lose their hopes and forget their dreams. So the nothing grows stronger.
What is the nothing?
It's the emptiness that's left. It is like a despair, destroying this world. And I have been trying to help it.
But why?
Because people who have no hopes are easy to control. And whoever has the control has the power.
Hopefully I'm not getting too corny with this clip from the NeverEnding Story. But heckin' heckity, it just seems like those, quote, corny sci-fi and fantasy movies from the 70s and 80s, and some from the 90s, are more like documentaries. While more recent movies seem like rank propaganda to continue making us into hypnotized angels. And reality is just so fiction, like a Fantasia or something. Am I getting old or just wiser? Is the battle between programming and freedom, Yaldabaoth and the Logos, just sewn into everything in this universe? Especially art expressions. In that reality that seems just so fiction today.
Whoa, we're not talking about reality here. We're talking about fiction. It's different, you know?
A reality is just what we tell each other it is. Sane and insane could easily switch places if the insane were to become the majority. You would find yourself locked in a padded cell, wondering what happened to the world.
As with the NeverEnding Story, as with this reality like fiction, we continue to fight to avoid being nothing, but to thrive to be no thing of the Hindus. The Archons continue to drive us away from our dreams and creativity, pushing us into that empty despair. But we persist in creating better than the creator gods and their catamites in the establishment. We will no longer be controlled. We will no longer allow the wolves of Wall Street and the dogs of dogma to oppress us. We are free, and we are beautiful, and we are the sons and daughters of Wisdom Most High. We are the Gnostics, those veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the control to the heart of the sun. And we're writing our own gospel and living our own myth.
You need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become?
Welcome to that dream of you, that never-ending story. Welcome to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Welcome to the end of the world and the beginning of your own inner supernova revolution. You are the final authority, have always been, a champion eternal, the author of your own salvation, and you are amazing and can do so many wonders. That's the truth, no matter what the wolves of Wall Street and the dogs of dogma tell you. We're in this together, but we can't do it alone. We are human, that gorgeous place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. As Stephen Heller once said, Gnosticism is not a do-it-yourself spirituality. No true spirituality is. We need assistance from above, even if it's a demonic expression of our unconscious. That imaginary friend, perhaps, as was Simon Magus / Philemon to Carl Jung when he went to find his soul in the Red Book. We need a sangria sangha, and we need a mentor, and we need the solar warmth of a community. We need each other.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share, undimmed by time, unbound by death.
That's one of the themes of this episode, my beloved Truth Seekers, as we are joined by the fabulous Rodney Orpheus, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss his latest work, Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, Group Magick Rituals. An amazing book that covers so much heretical ground. As with the book, in our interview, we will be reporting the role of technology in modern magic, the perils and opportunities of having a teacher or guru, innovative techniques for any esoteric practice, and so much more.
Did you say the words right this time?
Well, maybe I didn't say every single tiny little syllable, no, but basically I said them, yeah. Basically.
Rodney's sapience will truly help you, I promise thee. And his experience as a veteran magician, rock artist, technologist, and psychonaut is more useful than ever. We can't do it alone, and you are not alone. There are forces from beyond moving to help you, but you simply must fight for your humanity as you fight for your dreams and creativity. Every artist is not a special type of person, as the saying goes, but every person is a special type of artist.
If we live our lives the right way, then every single thing we do becomes a work of art.
It seems sometimes hopeless when we don't allow our imagination to rise, trapped in this Westworld universe, an endless wave of material dullness. But as my friend Jim West once told me, the world's prison is built out of matter. And even if matter is ultimately neutral or inherently paradoxical stuff that can be used as a vessel of liberation or enslavement, we still know for certain that unlike the spirit, by nature, matter is unable to, quote, bloweth where it listeth, as the Bible says. This tells me that only your spirit can escape matter. In fact, that's the key to getting out of jail. The good news is that you already possess this key. After all, your imaginative spirit is already freely exiting the prison. It's your feet that are stuck on the ground. Therefore, might I suggest, they are not the ultimate key?
Now, I've gotten word that a child is using his imagination, and I've come to put a stop to it.
As for the key to keeping your mind free and sustaining the Dharma of Gnosis, practically speaking, most likely you'll find yourself wandering in and out of the prison walls. The world tends to lock us back up as soon as we break out.
Birth is a curse and existence is a prison.
But you can always escape again. And while death might seem like a final punishment, it's also a final escape. Meanwhile, whenever you're stuck inside, it's only courteous that you show the way to the door to anybody else who asks. We're all in this together.
I can't enjoy anything unless everybody is. If one guy is starving someplace, that's, I puts a crimp in my evening.
I, your host Miguel Connor, needs your help just as much. And thanks for those of you who are there for me in so many ways. In the Kenoma, and in the inner sanctum of Gnosis, and in the Discord channel, and in those insightful emails or phone calls that prove there are forces working for me. I'm not alone.
We're all in it together, kid.
And whatever you do, as Jim alludes to, don't forget that your body is part of your myth. Yes, it will fail you in the end. Make no mistake. Whether it's by not overcoming that crushing truck or by that cell that splits the wrong cancerous way, it's gonna be painful and disappointing.
First, you have to give up. First, you have to know, not fear, know that someday you're gonna die.
But the body is so full of narrative. As Nicholas Laus recently said in the inner sanctum of Gnosis, if you become too ascetic, then your psyche becomes an authoritarian despot over the flesh, like some demiurge, and that extends to other life forms. If you're too libertine with your body, you become indifferent to responsibility and end up being detached from social and ethical standards. Ironically, turning into that biological robot Alex Tsakiris talks about because all that exists is your rush for pleasure. Matter matters, yes. And in the middle path, and in this fantasia, we can use it to our advantage to optimize our dreams and creativity.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion.
As the Gospel of Philip states, fear not the flesh nor love it. If you fear it, it will gain mastery over you. If you love it, it will swallow and paralyze you. And relating to being a community and helping each other, the Gospel of Philip also states, love uses nothing and takes nothing. It is the highest and vastest freedom. All exists through love. Led us to an unforgettable interview with Rodney Orpheus.
We now return to the end of a depressing 1970s sci-fi movie starring a guy in a turtleneck.
We've gone far enough. I think we're safe from the corporation here.
Adzin, look!
It can't be! No! We'll never defeat the corporation! They've won!
There is one way, Adzin. You can shoot yourself.
If it's the only way, I must.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Rodney Orpheus to discuss his book, Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, Group Magic Rituals and Other Sundries. Thanks for being here, and how you doing, Rodney?
I'm very happy to be here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, glad to have you on. And with us, we've got the Moondog Vance Sachi. Thanks for being here too, Vance, and how are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Happy to be here and looking forward to a very fascinating show.
Oh, indeed, because I really enjoyed the book very much, and it brought a lot of insights to my life. But to start out with, Rodney, let's get a little into the beginning. Were you the kind of individual who was always interested in the esoteric or occult, or how did this happen?
Oh, yeah, it went back a long way. I mean, I'm originally from Northern Ireland, as I'm sure some people already recognize by the accent. So I grew up in a very old world rural community in Ireland, on a farm. And so, Irish culture is still, even then, back in those days, was still had a lot of folklorish elements still entwined in it. I mean, even though everyone was Christian, I remember like being a little kid, going up to some other farmer's field with my father, and there was like the field had like in the center of the field there was a small hill with a ring of trees around it, and my father was saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be easier if you just cut those trees down? You could plow right across the field." And the other guy went, "Well, that's a fairy ring. You don't want to be cutting that down." And my father was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you don't want to cut that down, do you? And I remember, I was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old at the time. I remember looking and going like, what? This is weird. This is strange. And so even though these gentlemen had been Christians for generations, they were still, talking about fairy rings and how you didn't cut the trees down. And that's a memory that stuck with me and was fascinated me. So I grew up with that kind of mentality and that kind of background noise, if you like. There was like all sorts of folklore magic that was never even wouldn't be even considered at all to be magic, but every village had somebody who had a charm, as they called it. Like, for example, my sister sprained her ankle at one point, and so they sent her down to this old woman who lived a couple of streets away, who had a charm for healing wounds, and she just put some poultice of some thing around my sister's leg, and she came back healed. And at one point, my little brother had terrible nosebleeds. So my father found someone in another village who had a charm to cure nosebleeds. So he went over there and to see the man and talk to him. And I by this stage I was a teenager, and so I said to my father, I was in my early teens, I said to my father, like, can you when you talk to the guy and when he does what he does, can you please note the exact time? And I was at home with my little brother, whose nose was still bleeding uncontrollably. And then it just suddenly stopped. So when my father came home again, I asked what time it was. And of course, it was the exact time that my little brother's nose stopped bleeding. So there was all sorts of strange things like that, that were still completely accepted, but not really talked about in any kind of esoteric way. It was just the natural way of things. And I think my first real formal connection with occultism, I think, was I was down in my local library, and I was a voracious reader as a child. I just devoured books, and I had read everything in the library that was at all interesting to a young person. And then it was a very cold winter's day. I remember it distinctly, and I found this book tucked under a bookshelf, and it was called Magick, an Occult Primer by David Conway. And I thought, what's this? And I had been interested in conjuring and illusion. I thought it was something to do with stage magic. So I went, what the hell? I have nothing else to read. So I brought this book home, and I sat in my bedroom in front of a log fire, and it was snowing outside. I remember distinctly. And I was sitting in an old rocking chair that my grandma had given me, and I was reading this book, and I read it from cover to cover without getting up, like just, wow, I was so astonished at this. And it all seemed to make perfect sense, but it was beyond anything that I'd ever even considered before. And I thought, this can't possibly be true. I must be misunderstanding this somehow. So I sat down and I read it again from cover to cover. So I read it twice that evening, and it just made perfect sense. So, but being the junior Mr. Spock that I was back then, I thought, well, the only way to be sure this is to test it scientifically. So I decided I would do one of the rituals in the book and see what happened. And boom, something happened, which scared the living bejesus out of me. But set me upon the path that I am still, I guess.
What you talked about reminds me of my childhood growing up in Mexico and Portugal, Peru, and other places, is that magic realism where the spiritual world is completely ingrained into the material world. And I think we've lost it because I moved from Chicago. I live in the country and people don't even blame Satan for things anymore. And I kind of miss it. You know, again, it's like, is it the same way in the UK? We've lost that magic realism.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. I've never really found that in any other Western European country, and I travel and in North America, except in things like in my late 20s, I got very interested in voodoo and Santeria and sort of New World versions of African religions, and that was the first place where I really found that sense of innate magical background that's infused into everyday life. And that was one of the reasons I found those religions very attractive. Because one of the things, like Western white, people are continually like sitting there, like discussing how many angels can dance in the head of the pin. And why and how, and mathematically trying to work it out, or discussing deep philosophical issues on does God exist, and if so, what nature does God have, blah blah blah. Whereas the first time I went to Santeria ritual, when the god possessed somebody standing in front of me and looked in my eyes and started talking to me, all questions of the meaning of existence or whatever just go out the window because it's purely experiential then, and I find that very attractive.
I think you hit it on the head. It's about the experience of the divine other than the answers to life. So, yeah, well said. And here's an interesting question I wanted to ask you. You've had a very amazing life as a musician, occultist, author, technologist, and all that. And I was reading somebody saying, this pagan saying, well, forget about paganisms being connected or embedded to nature. In these days, we have to be techno-paganist, or Eric Davis wrote in his book, Technosis. So and in a way, you are kind of a living case study of that, would you say? Would you say that paganism and technology really need to embed themselves, or are we forgetting about nature?
Well, that's an interesting. That question is a very big question.
Yeah, I figure, but you've been in so much. You've experienced and so involved in all of this.
Exactly. I mean, I'm very technology aware. I mean, that's my whole life has been about creating and working with very leading edge technology. I design technology for a living. But I come from, as I just said, a very rural, nature-oriented background. One of my favorite bands, a band called Kraftwerk, a German band, and they are known, as being very. They're one of the very first synthesizer bands. There are 4 guys. They all play synthesizers. Right, yeah. They stand on stage. They look very robotic. And they did a record called The Man Machine, and it had a song on it called We Are the Robots, another song called Showroom Dummies, and so on. And so they have this image of being extremely technological, which they are. But one of the things that a lot of people find strange when they look below the surface is that the guys in Kraftwerk are obsessive cyclists. They love bicycles. In fact, one of the guys in the band even has his own team that enters the Tour de France. They're really seriously cyclists. And the reason they are seriously cyclists is because they love bicycles because they are the perfect combination of man and machine. It is a machine that's entirely powered by human effort and guided by human effort, and increases the potential of humans in that sense. And also, it's very close to nature. You don't have layers of metal between you and the world outside. So they obsessively cycle because they enjoy getting back to their bodies and having that very physical connection with the technological world. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, I cycle a lot as well. I love to cycle for exactly the same reasons. And the reason I point that out is because I think that questions like the one you just asked are always based on some sort of premise that it's an either-or situation. And I don't think it is an either-or situation. And also, there's this idea that nature is somehow untouched by humankind, which of course is nonsense. All the nature that we know is a result of a symbiotic relationship between the natural world and humankind. There are very, very few spaces in the world anymore that aren't a product of human endeavor, which is unfortunate in a lot of ways, but that's the way it is. I mean, like a classic example is when white people first came to North America, they were astonished at how God had created this world that was perfectly designed for them to live in. That was because they didn't realize that for hundreds, maybe thousands of years beforehand, Native Americans had been farming it and preserving it and creating what they thought was the natural world. Their idea of the natural world wasn't natural, wasn't at all. It's just that the Native Americans who had tended all those forests and fields had all died out from catching white people's diseases and left the land open or been massacred. But so this idea of the natural world and this sort of romantic 17th century, 18th century idea of going back to nature, which is where a lot of it comes from, is in itself a complete illusion and myth in a lot of ways. And of course, a lot of what we modern paganism in inverted commas is also a completely modern invention. So I think we have to be wary of this idea of dreaming of some mythological golden, let's go back to the land mentality. As somebody who grew up on the land, it ain't too golden when you're out there farming in the dirt in November.
Yes, indeed. And I think the way to view it, as I've talked to scholars, is the word techne simply means the craft. And as humans, we are meant to use craft. Our phone's a technology, but so is prayer, so is magic, so is riding your bike, right?
Right, exactly.
And and it's also a good point. I mean, I know the Amazon forests have been on the news lately, but as many have found out, it really was the natives of the Amazons who made it rich. They terraformed it, as you said, long before white people had come there.
Yeah, and had a better understanding of how to do it in general. But,
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, like I've read, the Mayans were terrible with the environment. They destroyed the environment around them, and then they became extinct. I guess that's a lesson, right?
Yeah, we're one that we still haven't learned well enough, unfortunately. But
that's technology, and that's the human nature. And you talked about Kraftwerk, a band that I remember being as a teenager really helped me through some tough times too. What would you say would be some of your musical or occult or literary influences that really informed your views in your life, Rodney?
Well, okay, that's a question that could keep me talking for a weekend.
Yeah, exactly. That's another loaded question. Sorry.
Who were from? Well, let's start with music. I think the first band I ever really got into were like psychedelic bands like Hawkwind and Gong, which I loved as an early teen, because they were very spiritual, but also quite anarchistic in the way they did things. In fact, I was just been listening to Hawkwind all day today while I've been working on the new book. They're still a magnificent band.
Is that the one with Michael Moorcock?
Michael Moorcock worked with him for quite a while. Yeah,
he's one of my favorite authors.
Oh, I love Michael Moorcock.
Yeah, me too.
Lately, I'm a huge fan. One of the greatest moments of my life was a few months ago when Michael Moorcock left a comment on my Facebook page. I was like,
oh wow.
The 14-year-old inside me just like had a paroxysm of excitement. That's still like, little things like that just still make me so excited and so happy to see.
I'm envious, Rodney, very envious.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Michael Moorcock, as a literary fan, I mean, Moorcock is still one of the greatest writers. He's, I think, probably the greatest living writer that we have. I love his work immensely. I'm just actually rereading the Elric saga right now.
Oh, wow. I think I've read it about 20 times in a row in my life.
Exactly. It's one of those things you come back to at least every 2 or 3 years. I love his work. Gloriana is an amazing novel.
Agreed.
And Runestaff was the history of the Runestaff was the first thing I read, and that's amazing. That's actually just been optioned by the BBC. Apparently, it's going to be the next big BBC production, which will be interesting to see what.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So Hawkwind, actually, Dave Brock just posted on his page that they celebrated their 50th anniversary today, which is quite remarkable. The band's been around 50 years and still making great music. So who else? I mean, I was also David Bowie. I loved David Bowie's Berlin period. That was a big influence on me as a teenager. Low, Heroes, and Lodger, just amazing records. Still listen to them a lot. And of course, the punk movement. I remember being in a record. I was coming out of school one day, probably should have been in school, but I went to the local record store and I walked in the door and this record was playing, and it was this like incredibly fast, distorted noise with this woman screeching over the top, and it was just the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. And I went to the guy in the store and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "It's X-Ray Specs. It's called Oh Bondage Up Yours." And I was like, "I don't know what it is, but give it to me now." And I went out and bought a guitar the next day, and that's there was a band called Alternative TV. They did a fanzine, and the cover of one of the issues of the fanzine just had 3 guitar chords on it, E, A, and D, I think, E, A, and G on the cover, the bar chords printed on the cover, and then the subheading was "Now Form a Band." And I looked at that and went, "Okay, I shall." And that's how I became a musician. I went home, learned those 3 chords, and wrote a song, and that's how that started. So the punk movement was hugely formative. Bands like the Buzzcocks and the Sex Pistols, Stiff Little Fingers were a band from Northern Ireland who did their first album was called Alternative Ulster, which was the first really political record I ever heard. Which was hugely important to young people in Ireland because it was the first record we'd ever heard that spoke about the experience of growing up in Northern Ireland in the war that was happening and the problems that we had there. And the Undertones, of course, also in band from Northern Ireland. I saw their second ever concert, I think, and it was amazing. So that's how all that started.
I was listening to your music last night, really enjoying it, the Cassandra Complex, and it reminded me a lot of a band called VNV Nation. Are you familiar with them, Rodney?
Yeah, I know the guys from VNV Nation, yeah.
I think they're from Northern Ireland too, right?
Yeah, Ronan is, the singer. Yeah, he's... I've played a few shows with those guys, and they're in fact, we have the same tour agent. But we came long before that.
Right, yeah, but definitely the parallels, the esoteric themes, and all that, and the sound. Yeah. So, of course, I enjoyed it a lot. And
Ronan has a great voice. He's very emotive and very passionate on stage, and he has a really great way of connecting with the audience, which I really respect a lot.
Yes, and unfortunately, I missed them last time they came to Chicago, so I have been kicking myself for quite a few years. But life ain't over yet. So
indeed, they're still touring a lot.
Yes, they are. So I'm waiting for the next time. And I was listening to one of your songs. Of course, it just jumped out to me. I had to get the lyrics, and I listened to it over and over again. And that was this wonderful song you have called A Gnostic Christmas, which was in 1991. I thought, wow, what a great connection. In 1991, I was basically a neocon and a Catholic. I was still asleep at the wheel, if you would. So I had never heard really of Gnosticism, but maybe tell the audience how, and I advise the audience to please listen to it. How did this song come about? It's a beautiful homage and call to Sophia.
Right. That's actually, it was a little EP we did called the Gnostic Christmas EP. And that came about because I got initiated into the OTO at Christmas in Germany. Was 89, I think. Yeah, I think it must have been 89. Christmas 89, I think I got initiated into the OTO. And it was at Christmas, and it was in the middle of nowhere in Germany, and it was really cold. There was like 2 feet of snow on the ground, and the heating had broken down in the place where I was being initiated, so it was super cold. And also I'd never seen the OTO Gnostic Mass up to that point. So the Germans who were initiating me learned the initiation ritual in English specifically so that I would understand it, which was ironic because what they didn't realize was I spoke German. So, but God love them. They made such an effort. And then they did the OTO Gnostic Mass. They did that in German, but I already knew the text fairly well in English, so it was easy enough to understand. But they made a huge effort to put this on so that I could experience it. And it was extremely touching and meaningful for me because, I'd read all this Crowley stuff for many, many years, and I really thought that I knew it inside out, and I did intellectually. But it wasn't until I was sitting there with a Gnostic Mass happening, I was going to say in front of me, but actually sort of around me. I was part of it. You don't just sit and watch it. And it was like seeing this theory manifested in reality in 3D in front of me was just enormously powerful, and I just sobbed all the way through. Just huge tears running down my face because this thing that I'd been reading about and thinking about for so long was happening right there, and it was extremely powerful. So I decided to write a song about it, and shortly after that, I was thinking about it a lot, and I wanted to express it somehow. And shortly after I was on tour, I met this very nice girl who was called Sophia, and she was talking to me, and she was like, "Will you write a song for me?" And I'm like, "Sure." And she was like, "No, you won't." And I'm like, "Guess what? I will." And so I thought, okay, and just because she was so adamant that I wouldn't just write a song for some random person, really was a random person. But I'm that kind of person that if someone says you won't do that, I'll obviously have to do it. So I thought, okay, Sophia, Gnosticism, wisdom, da-da-da. And then the whole thing came from there. So I wrote it as a love song to a girl called Sophia. But that's the surface aspect of the song. But it's actually about that love relationship of experiencing the divine feminine through the Gnostic Mass, and so once you know the background, the song has a totally different sense because it's got the lyrics are you opened your heart to me at Christmas. It's like. And then there's a section which says "cold hands, warm hearts" because everyone was freezing to death during this whole thing. And so the whole song is that experience of me being initiated and coming to that first genuine Gnostic experience. And so that's what the song's about.
Wonderful. Yes, that Gnosis. And I highly recommend the audience to listen to it and the rest of his music. It's a wonderful song. And so why don't we get to your book, Grimoire of Aleister Crowley. Again, I enjoyed it. It's highly recommended by guests that have been on the show, like Lon Milo DuQuette and the wonderful Sorita d'Este and others. Tell us how you came to write this book.
Well, that was my second book. I mean, I wrote Abrahadabra way back in the day, a long time ago, as a beginner's book, because people kept coming up to me and saying, "Can you recommend a good beginner's book?" And I couldn't. So someone said to me, "Well, you should just write one because you explain it so well." So I wrote Abrahadabra, which did extremely well, and still sells extremely well. So then people kept writing me saying, "I love this book. It's the first book I've read on Magick, and it's really changed my life. And I've done everything in the book. Are you going to write a follow-up? Write a more advanced book?" And people kept asking this, and I kept going, and I thought about it, and then I thought to myself, wait a minute. This isn't really how it works. When I actually got back to these people and asked them what they were doing, they'd all read the first book, and then they'd joined up with some other people. They'd joined the OTO, or they'd joined another magical group, or they got together with their friends, whatever it happened to be. And so I realized that usually the next step from being a beginner isn't to be advanced. The next step is to actually be a beginner with other people, to actually form some kind of community experience. And I think that's kind of essential, human beings are not designed to be solitary creatures. I mean, there are two reasons why human beings are successful. One is the craft that we talked about earlier. We use tools, but other animals use tools too. Crows use tools, and they're not as successful as we are. But the other reason we're successful is because we operate as a community. We're very good at operating socially. We're very good at communicating experiences to each other, and we're good at supporting each other and helping each other. And so I started thinking that the right follow-up book would be a book that was designed specifically for people in groups. And not just that. I've read so many occult books. One of the reasons I wrote the first book, and the reason this book is the way it is because when I was younger, I read so many occult books that promised to teach me to do things, and then spent 200 pages telling me their philosophy. And I don't really care about your philosophy, Sorry, man, I don't really care. I don't really care what you think. I don't really care what God told you or what some spirit told you. I don't care about that. I want to do it myself. That's what real Gnosis is about. It's about that self-knowledge, that realization, that inner realization, that personal connection with the divine. And yeah, it's all very nice to hear how what you experienced, or what you were told, or how you think, or what your opinion is. But that doesn't really help me. And so I thought, and ritual is what helps me. Ritual is how we get that experience. Ritual is how we comprehend the divine, not through someone else's eyes or through someone else's words, but through our own eyes and our own hearts. And so one of the things that was very important to me in the first book was to make sure that there was lots of things to do. And in the first book, it's divided into chapters, which had to have some philosophical basis behind it because people needed context. But in the first book, Crowley wrote a book called Magick in Theory and Practice. My book is really Magick in Practice and Theory, because in my world, practice comes first and theory comes second. Theory is what you derive from your practice, not the other way around. And so in my first book, I would express exercises and rituals people could do, and then after that, talk about the kind of things that you might feel or might happen to you as a result. Not tell people, here's what it all means, now go away and do it. That's pointless. So in Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, I took that even further, and the whole book is just lots of rituals. Now, of course, I contextualize those rituals a lot as well, but the primary purpose is to give you a book of stuff to do. Very, very practical, very straightforward in that sense. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think either. To whoever's listening here, I hope I can be entertaining, and I hope I can help enlighten you a little teeny bit. But at the end of the day, that's meaningless, because it's what you do that really counts. And unless you go away and do it for yourself and feel it for yourself, anything I say is worthless. So that's what Grimoire of Aleister Crowley came from. This idea that a bunch of people could buy this book and start working together and start doing things and exploring magic, exploring ritual, exploring gnosis, exploring spiritual energies in whatever way you want to put it.
Nice. And yes, for the listeners, the book has very easy to follow rituals. There's graphs, there's pictures, there's a lot of them. You can find the ones that might work for you. Great work, Rodney. And going back to the ritual group, on page 187, I'm quoting you. You say, I strongly recommend that readers apply for initiation in an established, successful, long-running order. And you say, again, we go back to my idea of the living case study. You say that this has changed your life in a very positive way.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was a member of OTO for 29 years, I think. Oh my God, I'm so old. And I spent a lot of time in the OTO, done a lot of work. I took the initiations all the way through OTO. And it was absolutely life-changing, for sure. And I do recommend that people have that initiatory experience of some type. It doesn't have to be OTO. That was the one that was convenient and spoke to me, but it can be anything. I mean, I've also been initiated into a Santeria group as well, which was also extremely important to me. And so and I've worked with various other magical traditions. There's no religious or spiritual tradition that is the one thing for everyone. And it's impossible. But it's worth it's worth getting a connection to those kind of things. I mean, one of the things that was very meaningful for me in the OTO was the first time I initiated someone else into OTO. And I remember sitting there in the temple, all dressed up in my finery or whatever. Everything was prepared in front of me, and the candidate was outside waiting. And I was just, sitting there quietly trying to prepare myself, obviously nervous because I'd never initiated someone before. And then I had this, I want to say, almost like a vision. And I thought about that woman in Germany who initiated me, sitting in her freezing cold temple way back then at Christmas. And then I thought about the person who initiated her, and the person who initiated him, and the person who initiated him, I think was Aleister Crowley. And then I realized that I was just another link in this chain, and that the person who was about to walk in the room was going to be the next link in the chain coming down, and maybe someday they'd be sitting in that chair doing the same thing. And there was this sort of sensation of all these people in chairs sort of above me and behind me, if you like, each of who had gone to the step to pass this knowledge, this spirit down from generation to generation. And it was very humbling. The great thing about a moment like that is it doesn't make you feel egotistic. It doesn't go, oh, look at me, I'm so special being one of these people. Quite the opposite. It makes you feel, wow, I'm a cog in this machine, but this machine is awesome.
Rodney.
Yeah.
I was wondering what you thought about the idea of rituals in virtual reality. Do you think that would work? You have these 3D immersive realities like Second Life and Active Worlds years ago. And you'd have so many more possibilities. You wouldn't have to go to the store and buy the candlesticks and the weapons and the whatever you needed for your ritual. Have you seen anything like that?
Funny you should say that. So I'm a big computer gamer. amongst many other. I love gaming, and many years ago I got very ill at one point, very, very, very ill, and I was bedridden for months. And my girlfriend at the time bought me this computer game called Neverwinter Nights, which was a Dungeons and Dragons a game. And so I played through it, and it was great, but I played through it really quickly, and I was still bedridden, nothing to do. And then I realized it had a level creator, designer program built into it, so you could create your own environments and create your own stories. So I started playing around with this because I had nothing better to do, and taught myself how to program and build computer games. And so I built this little village and populated it with versions of people that me and my girlfriend knew as a surprise for her, so that we could play together when she wasn't working. So she'd come home. So every day I'd build a little bit more of this world, and she would come back from work, and we'd play together. And it was very amusing. And then one day, by mistake, I forgot to password protect the server, and a bunch of other people turned up and started playing. So I ended up running this big online computer world for years, and won awards for it. So there you go. But very cool. So to bring it back around to your original question, when I was working on this book, one of the things I did was I modeled all of the rituals in Neverwinter Nights. I modeled them inside the game. Because the game was actually, the server I ran, the game was set it started in Montsegur, and it was the story of the Cathars and the Inquisition in Montsegur.
Wow.
And so I found some old maps of Montsegur Castle, and I modeled Montsegur and the cliff it was on, and I modeled the village below as close, it's close, and in a fantasy way. And one of the main plot of the game was that the players had to, explore Montsegur and evade the Inquisition and find their way to the castle. And then they had to, the Gnostics in the castle had possession of the Holy Grail. So the characters had to take the Grail and escape the Inquisition and get a boat to the Holy Land with the Grail. That was the major quest. There was also a quest where they had to retrieve a sacred lance and bring it back to bring the land back to fertility and so on. It was lots of occult and Gnostic themes in it. And then it later became expanded so that when the players got to the Holy Land, they could go to Jerusalem, and I modeled, the Jerusalem during the Crusades. And had all the historical characters there, but lots of other occult themes built in as well. So when I modeled Montsegur as a joke, in a way, I modeled the OTO Gnostic Mass inside Montsegur as the Gnostic ritual. And so the players could go into the temple in the castle, and the NPCs, the non-player characters, would, if they approached them, they would speak lines from the OTO Gnostic Mass, and you could get baptized by the priestess, who would then give you her sword, and it was a magical weapon. And if you talked to the priest, he would give you his magical lance, and that was a magical +1 spear, etc. So this whole thing was modeled there as a way for the players to interact with the Mass. So then when I was working on this book, I took it one step further, and I modeled every single one of these rituals in Neverwinter Nights. And the reason I did that was, well, one thing, because it was cool. It was very cool. But one of the reasons I did that is that one of the things I've found from reading other occult books is that frequently the explanations of how to do things are junk, if they're in there at all. And there are a lot of occult books out there that either the guy who wrote it does not know how to explain what he's doing, or he never actually did it. Because you'll get things that say, look, pick this thing up and move it over there, but it's actually impossible in context. So I modeled all the rituals interactively inside the Neverwinter Nights engine. And then I had friends of mine around the world to take on the parts, because you can take on the characters and move around. And I'd walk around inside the rituals and test them that way, and test, oh, I need to be standing in this position to do this. And so I actually virtualized the whole walkthroughs. And on my Facebook page, I have some screenshots of those models, which I'll send to you guys if you're interested. And that was that was one of the things that was really important to me was modeling out how to do this. And I've actually ended up teaching people how to do the Gnostic Mass inside Neverwinter Nights by using that system. And we'd walk through the entire ritual and show where everything has to be. So that was a really great way of learning and physically, virtually modeling a physical space when I didn't have time to do it with real people in a real environment, which I also did as well, of course, don't get me wrong. I mean, I actually had real people walk through all of these rituals many, many times so that I could beta test them. I beta tested everything in the book the same way that a software programmer would beta test a piece of software, to make sure that everything I was writing made sense, and to make sure that I could, what I would do is I would write a draft of the ritual and then give it to a group of people, and then just tell them to go ahead and do it in front of me just based on what I wrote, and then see if they could do it. And of course, I would think that I had it all perfectly explained, and they'd be doing something completely different than I expected. So I would sit and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite until I had a set of instructions that were clear and coherent and that people could genuinely understand. But to get back to your original question about the virtual reality space, that is genuinely fascinating. I love I have a VR headset here, and I play virtual reality games. And I think the answer to your question about can you do this in virtual reality? I think ultimately the answer is going to be yes, very definitely. Because the interesting thing about virtual reality is that it's not just a better screen. It's something completely different. When you play a computer game or look at a computer, you're basically looking at a two-dimensional window into a space. It's like looking through a window of your house. The things on the other side of the window, you can't touch them or interact with them. They're over there. You can see them, but you don't really have. You're not part of that environment. When you look through a window, the environment is the other side of the window, and it's the same with a normal computer screen. But when you're in virtual reality, your intellect knows, yes, I'm wearing a big headset and I'm looking at something on a computer, but your body thinks completely differently. Your body thinks, holy shit, I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and I'm about to fall over. And your heart starts beating really fast and you sweat and you're like freaking out because your body reacts as if you're there. Virtual reality is it's a completely different experience than using a 2D system. So yeah, I think the only limitation with virtual reality as we now have it is that the resolution is still quite low. It's still cartoonish. You can't really have, virtual reality that looks like a movie, not without a huge amount of money, but that's just a question of time. So I think that, yes, in the very near future, we will be able to have group virtual reality sessions that are every bit as powerful as being there in a face-to-face environment, because your body, your mentality does react as if you're in a face-to-face environment. A classic example, VR porn. VR porn, a very different experience than watching porn movies. So I'm told.
Yeah, so I'm told. Asking for a friend.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And I think on a little side note, maybe this virtual reality will work better because you're talking, again, your book gives a lot of advice on how to do rituals, how to prepare and all that. For example, you talk about don't use a sharp blade and all that. And don't you talk about one scene about being careful because somebody used hairspray and they burned their hair while you were in a ritual?
Yep. Seen it, been there, done that. Yes. That was actually another OTO Gnostic Mass. The priestess was a very tall, beautiful Gothic girl who had massive, long black hair, and she loved to like tease her hair up in a really high Gothic style with loads of hairspray. And of course, in the OTO Gnostic Mass, there are 22 candles on the altar, as well as the priestess, and 22 candles and lots of hairspray. Not a good combination. So we were actually in the middle of the Gnostic Mass when someone was like, "What's that smell?" And we're like, "I don't know."
You summoned a demon.
And then we saw the flames coming up above her head, and like, holy shit. Yeah. And the thing about sharp blades, I have a scar on my right hand right now where someone stabbed me in a ritual, and I had to go and get 9 stitches. And then went back and completed the ritual afterwards.
Wow.
But so I know that one for a fact. Yes. Yeah. Because I honestly, the section at the beginning on the safety aspects has gotten me the most criticism of anything in the whole book. I had so many people writing. There was even a review. Some guy wrote a review, and he absolutely trashed the book. And he said, "Does Rodney Orpheus think that people are so stupid that they would do these kind of things?" And I'm like, no, I don't think they're that stupid. I know for a fact. I've got the stitches.
Again, you're a living case study.
Yeah, absolutely. But this guy seriously thought that I was being, insulting to magicians, that they would be that stupid. It's like, duh. Like, seriously, guy? Clearly, the guy's criticism said more about his lack of experience than anything else. Because anybody who has done this stuff a lot will tell you, I've heard so many of these kind of war stories that like, oh my God. I have a classic example. You mentioned Sarita Deste earlier. She was, I was doing a Gnostic Mass in Glastonbury, and she was there. And during the Gnostic Mass, I was swinging around a censer full of incense. And the charcoal, I swung it a little bit too hard, and the charcoal flew out of the censer and landed on the floor, and landed on my robe on the floor. It bounced off the road, landed on my robe, and started burning a hole in it.
Oh dear!
And it was like terrifying. And Sarita immediately, without even batting an eyelid, jumped up, and she had a maggot. She had we have a cardboard hymnal of the anthem that the people sing during the Mass. And she picked that, and she slid that under the charcoal and picked it up and chucked it out the window in one motion, and saved the whole thing, and then just went back to her seat, and she didn't even bat an eyelid. And I remember looking at her thinking, it was the coolest thing you've ever seen. The whole place was just like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. And then I remember thinking after, yeah, she's so cool because that's not the first time that's happened to her. So clearly,
it wasn't her first rodeo, as they say.
Yeah, it wasn't her first rodeo. So, massive respect to Sarita Deste on that one. So there. Yeah. So yeah, Rodney, all based on real events. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Do you think there's a connection between the Gnostic Mass and, when Crowley conceived of it, and the ancient Gnostic bridegroom chamber, the bridal chamber that nobody knows for sure about?
I don't think there's any historical connection except for what Crowley made up. I mean, as far as I understand it, Crowley didn't really have much of a knowledge of early Gnosticism, as indeed very few people did or even do. Right. So I think a lot of it came from, and a lot of our understanding of these of early Gnosticism actually comes from Christian writers being critical of it, which is ironic, really. Same for a lot of early pagan texts. Same with Mithraism. I mean, our knowledge of Mithraism basically comes from Roman writers going, oh my God, this is so shocking. What a horrible thing. They do this and this and this. And like, oh, thank you. So I think Crowley really, I don't think Crowley's the OTO Gnostic Mass that he wrote. It's a Gnostic Mass he wrote specifically as an OTO ritual. I don't think has any really strong connection except in in a purely spiritual and imaginative sense, which is fair enough because somebody made it up in the first place. So it's not like the original Gnostics had somebody else tell them what to do. They made it up too. So
right.
Interesting. So at the end of the day, it is what you make of it. I think in the Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, I give an alternative Gnostic Mass in there, which is actually a derivation from the Jules Darnell Gnostic Mass from the 19th century, the breaking of bread, which itself was completely made up too, because he didn't really have any understanding of what the Cathars or the Albigenses or whatever did really either. So, the history of Gnosticism, I think in a lot of ways, is the history of reinvention all down the line. And at the end of the day, by their fruit shall you know them.
Really well said, and thanks for sharing. Well, we are nearing the end of the interview, Rodney. Before we go, two things. Could you let the audience know where they can find out more about you and your impressive body of work, and maybe what are you working on next? What can we look forward to?
Okay, take that in order. Well, if you go to Google and type in the words Rodney Orpheus, you'll find me, because I am the only Rodney Orpheus in the world, as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
RodneyOrpheus.com is my website, and it's got a bunch of things there. I don't update it very frequently, but it is updated and should have some stuff on there. And there's links to my band, the Cassandra Complex, my principal band, and a lot of the musical work I do. You can go to Spotify and look for the Cassandra Complex there and listen to us on Spotify, or other streaming services are available. Or just go to my Facebook page. I'm on Facebook way too much, but yeah, I'm posting on Facebook like several times a day, and so feel free to look me up on Facebook, and where I'm highly opinionated and obnoxious in a lot of ways, and very political. So I warn you now, but you're welcome to come along and join in that conversation.
He is very political, audience. It's awesome. It's fun.
It's his dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Exactly. And what about the book?
What about the book? Well, the book, Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, it's on Red Needle Visor.
You said you were working on a new book.
I was working on the new book this morning, actually, up until I did this interview, and yesterday as well. I'm doing a new book along with another author called Phil Hine. I don't know if you're familiar with Phil Hine's work. He's a wonderful writer. You should definitely look him up. Phil Hine.
I will, yes, for sure.
And Phil and I actually met way back in the 80s when we were both young street punks, if you like, in Leeds in England. We met there. And back then we ran a magazine called Pagan News in the late 80s, which was really very, very popular, very, very influential back in the day, very irreverent, so we published it on a cheap desktop, one of the very first desktop publishing systems. In fact, we won an award, a design award for the best small press magazine back then. And back then it was in the middle of the Satanic Panic, if you can remember back that far, when people were getting their kids taken away from them and all sorts of insane things. So we spent a lot of time covering the Satanic Panic, and we were really the first people to really stand up against the bullshit that was going on, that was and express just how wrong it was. We spent a lot of time going to Christian bulletin boards and finding out what was really happening behind the scenes and exposing it, and that was like, I don't know, what's 25 years ago now. So anyway, a great publishing company called Strange Attractor Press, who work with MIT Press in the US, they have asked us to finally bring Pagan News back into print again. So I can exclusively reveal for the first time, yes, we're doing a Best of Pagan News compendium, which is we've collected together all the articles. We had amazing interviews with a lot of very famous occult personalities, and TV writers. Pat Mills, the comic book writer, the guy who wrote Robin of Sherwood, if you remember that, we interviewed him.
Oh wow, love that show.
Yeah, we interviewed him for Pagan News. He was very much pagan influenced, and a lot of great people and very well known artists and stuff. And we wrote a lot of really good articles, a lot of news bulletins. We really chronicled the entire Satanic Panic from beginning to end, really. So we had a lot of great humor. We had a wonderful humorist cartoonist who worked with us called Barry, used the pseudonym Barry Hairbrush, who wasn't either myself or Phil. And we had a lot of other occult writers. A great pagan writer called Julian Vane wrote for this. Mike Howard, excellent Wiccan writer, he wrote a series of stuff for us. So we're collecting together all of these articles, news items, cartoons, whatever, and doing this bumper book of pagan news. So that's going to come out on Strange Attractor and MIT Press next year. So it's going to be interesting, I think, because it's going to be, I think it has, by now, us weird street punks doing this cheap laser printed monthly newsletter, it's actually become like something of academic importance 25 years later. Who knew?
You've grown up, huh?
Yeah, I know. Bizarre, isn't it? So MIT Press are going to be publishing it, which is amazing.
Wow.
Well, we hope. That's the plan anyway. So yeah, that'll hopefully come out through MIT Press next summer, if we get all done on time. And it's looking good. And we have a enormous amount of material. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's of historical interest now, especially the Satanic Panic stuff. But there's also a lot of just great material that we had from a myriad of different writers. And so we thought, and reading back through it today, I mean, I hadn't looked at it for a couple of decades. We've just been we've OCR'd everything. I'm going through editing a lot of the work, and we're going to write a lot of articles around it as well and contextualize it. And there's some amazing work there. I think it's going to be a really interesting book. It's full of really masses of different information and very diverse opinions. It's also extremely funny. So I think it's going to be a killer. So I'll see you this time next year, hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah, we really look forward to this, Rodney, and that's really great news. But I think we're at the end. First, Vance, thanks for keeping us company on this wonderful, magical journey.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was delightful. Rodney, great to make your acquaintance, and congratulations on all your work. It's very interesting.
Yes, thank you very much, Rodney. We look forward to the next time you're on the show. For the listener, highly recommend Grimoire of Aleister Crowley. You're going to find some stuff that will work for you if you're an honest seeker of expanded consciousness in the magical way. So, Rodney, thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and giving us some of your Gnosis.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, gents.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. The first part of our interview with the amazing Rodney Orpheus. I do hope he continues his various works, because the man's got Gnosis and Technosis. For AB Prime members and patrons at Patreon, the second part gets very, very passionate. Rodney shares with us what is the Gnostic influence on Thelema. He discusses the shifting views of Crowley and then relates if he thinks Crowley was a racist. Then things explode as Rodney goes on about today's political correct and cancel culture concerning Crowley and other figures. The discussion slows down, but remains just as engaging as we return to maximizing group ritual, still stressing its importance. Rodney also tells us whether he thinks gods and demons even exist, and some friendly disagreements he has with Lon Milo DuQuette, and much more. So please become a member or patron at Patreon for the complete magical enchilada. I can't do it without you, and let's keep growing this red pill cafeteria. Damning your soul has never been this cheap, but you get your spirit back. A mere $5.99 a lunar cycle with many benefits. And some of these invite you to become part of a growing Gnostic community. Like full access to our new Discord channel and the archives with more than 450 episodes with the best and brightest in Gnosticism, Western esoterica, and free thought. And full episodes of my vlog, The Abraxas Brief. You'll also get an invitation to the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where I stream the Abraxas Brief live and answer your questions. And we have some truly intriguing conversations from an amazing community. And I'm always there to address your issues directly and give the latest on Gnostic news around the universe. Even support in the form of some shekels to PayPal or the US mail really keeps this crazy train going. We can't do it alone. You are not alone. There are forces from beyond helping you. And this heresy and Rodney's work will get them closer to you for your full awakening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self. Hello and goodbye as always.